moderator is Dr. Stephanie Bailey. She's served as assistant professor of physics at Chapman University, where she taught physics to life science majors. And she also has a lot of interest, and she uses novel ways to integrate science and art and science to enhance STEM learning. Stephanie received her PhD in experimental nuclear physics from College of William and Mary, Williamsburg, Virginia, and received her postdoctoral fellowship from Stanford Cancer Intervention in Department of Radiology at Stanford University School of Medicine. She also served as the project lead in Center for Health Policy at Stanford University School of Medicine. Additionally, she served as senior research associate in Virginia Commonwealth University Department of Healthcare Policy and Research. And interestingly, she was also Science and Tech Policy Fellow at AAAS. And then before joining Chapman, she was a physics lecturer at University of California, Santa Cruz.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and welcome everyone to our career and e-networking mixer event about teaching careers for STEM scientists. To sort of reiterate what Dr. Singh said, especially for those of you that are joining us for the first time, this event is part of the Graduate Professional Success, or GPS program, specifically for PhD students and postdocs in STEM fields at the University of California in Irvine. It's sort of a career and professional development program, if you will, and their goal is to better prepare STEM scientists for a variety of careers within the STEM workforce. And given the pandemic and the online platform for this event, we've welcomed and encouraged participants from other institutions to join. Again, the topic of today is teaching careers for STEM scientists. So if you're at all curious or interested in teaching as a future career, then you're definitely in the right place. We have a diverse and very accomplished panel of professors from both public and private institutions, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and it will be my pleasure to introduce you to them. Again, as Dr. Singh said, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box at any time, and you don't need to save your questions to the very end. We'll look at those audience questions as we progress and answer those that are relevant to the current discussion. So next, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce you to our panelists, starting with Dr. Deborah Fraser. She is an associate professor in the California State University Long Beach Department of Biological Sciences. That's a public university in Long Beach, California, and they have a student enrollment of about 40,000 students. Just to give you an idea of student enrollment. Then next we have Dr. Rachel Dominguez, and she's an associate professor of physics at Randolph-Macon College. And Randolph-Macon College is a private liberal arts college in Ashland, Virginia, which is a little bit north of Richmond. And it's a much smaller school than Cal State University Long Beach. I believe the enrollment at Randolph-Macon is around 1,500 students. And then finally, our third panelist is Dr. Arjun Nair, and he's an assistant professor in the Santa Ana College Department of Biology. And Santa Ana College is a public community college in Santa Ana, California. It's near Irvine. And it also, like California State University Long Beach, has an enrollment of about 40,000 students. And so with that said, panelists, I'd like to begin by asking you to describe to us your current teaching role and expertise. So for example, which subjects, topics, and classes do you teach? Do you teach predominantly lower or upper division, or a combination of both? Do you teach majors or non-majors? How many classes and preps do you typically have each semester and each quarter? So let's start with Dr. Fraser, please.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just up the road. I was a postdoc at UCI, so I've been where you are. I actually interviewed all over the country and ended up 10 miles up the road. So go figure. But that's not the question. Um, yes. So we at Cal State Long Beach, we have a sort of mixed teaching and research role. We are hired to teach 12 units per semester, but I have never once taught 12 units per semester. So that, that would be essentially 4 classes. The most I've ever taught is 2 in a formal sort of teaching environment, because we also get credit for teaching students in our lab. And as our research grows, we get sort of bought out of some teaching. So I teach routinely every year. I teach a lower division intro to cell and molecular biology, because I was hired as a cell and molecular biologist. And so that's a class that can have anywhere from 150 to 250 freshman, sophomore students in it learning cell biology for the first time. The large lecture classes are interesting because it's quite hard to sort of connect on a level, especially through Zoom. So that's kind of the challenge of that. But you get them when they're young and fresh and excited. So that's a benefit. I also teach an upper division cell and molecular biology lab to 16 students. So I go, all the way through. And then I teach what they call an elective. So in my specialty, which is, well, my specialty is immunology, but I actually teach cancer biology, and our cancer biologist teaches immunology, but that's just how it works out sometimes. So that's a class of around 30 upper division senior student undergrads, and also I have some master's students in that as well. And I pretty much just rotate through those through my time, but also I get credit for teaching students in my research lab as well.
Great, thank you, Dr. Fraser. I would love to hear from Dr. Nair at this point.
So hi, I'm Arjun. So like mentioned, I teach at Santa Ana College, which is also just a little north from UCI. It is a public community college, and so for the most part, you're not going to see a bunch of upper division classes there. What is considered lower division at, let's say, at UCI, will be the types of classes you would find at a community college. And so I personally teach anatomy and physiology, and so those can be non-major and major. I tend to teach the major classes there. And so since community college, students typically stay in community college, ideally between 2 to 3 years, I'm mostly teaching students who are there for their first year or their second year.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Nair. And Dr. Dominguez, please tell us about your current teaching role.
So I have a pretty different experience because I'm teaching at a small private liberal arts institution. It's kind of, I didn't go to a private institution. I went to the College of William and Mary, which is public, and I went to a lot of public schools for college, but now I'm at a private institution and it's very small. I am one of 3 members in our physics department. My specialty is computational and statistical physics, and I teach absolutely everything in physics. So almost everything in physics, almost every course that we offer in physics I've taught. So to give you an idea, this semester my teaching load is 1 introductory course, 1 advanced laboratory course, and 1 advanced theory course in electromagnetism. So that's about typical. The teaching load is pretty high. We teach 24 credit hours, which ends up being, could either be 2 lab lecture courses or it could be 4 lecture courses in a single semester. Let's see. Okay, so it seems like a lot of teaching. However, my experience is very different because my classes are very small. So my introductory class right now has 16 students. 16 to 24 students in an introductory class is typical. I teach in a small classroom, studio style setting. I have no graders. I do all my own grading. I do all my own everything. I don't have a lab assistant or anything like that. And my upper division courses, my majors courses that are theory in the 300 and 400 level, and even the advanced labs, 6 students can be as low as 2 or 3 students, can be as high as a dozen students, but very small numbers. It's a very personalized teaching experience. It's kind of, it's very sort of family feeling, because I usually know students, I learn their names when they're freshmen. I teach them almost every year, and then I see them graduate. So they really feel like my children coming in, and I see them develop and grow over the 4 years. So, so that's kind of a special thing with this college. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. It's a good place to start.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dominguez. And you make a great point that experiences will differ from institution to institution, but not only that, from department to department as well, in terms of workload and what exactly you teach and the breadth of what you teach. Great, so moving on. As a graduate student, I was actually very intent on becoming a research professor and pursuing my very own research agenda. But it turns out that over time and with age and experience, that goal actually shifted to teaching. So panelists, I'm wondering if you would please describe to us your career journey. Did you know at a young age that you wanted to be a teaching professor? And did you beeline it from college to professorhood? And I'm pretty sure that's what Professor Dominguez did. Or did you transition to teaching from another career? And do you even recall that, say, pivotal moment when you decided that teaching is what you wanted to do? And could you tell us about that? And so let's start with Dr. Dominguez, working in reverse here.
So I can't say that I knew that I definitely wanted to go into a teaching career, but I did go straight into a PhD program after college. So Stephanie and I were actually in college together. Our senior year, I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, and everybody else around me was applying to PhD programs. And I went to my advisor and I said, give me some schools to apply to. I guess I'm gonna do this. So, so I applied, and I went to the University of Washington to start out my PhD program there. And at that point, I was kind of just doing what everybody else was doing, which was, you know, at the start of my PhD program, working very hard in my courses, and everybody around me had some goal of getting into the particle theory department or getting into experimental physics or something like that. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So eventually I did what everybody was doing in a PhD program. I started trying out some research. I actually made a big shift from the West Coast to the East Coast to join my partner, and transferred into Boston University. Actually, I should mention that before I went to Boston University, I taught 1 year of 9th grade physics in a public charter school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which was an urban public school. It was very interesting. I thought that I might just, I said, maybe I'll love this and I'll just keep teaching high school for the rest of my life. I did not love it. I did not hate it. I thought it was a really interesting experience, and it was very educational for me. I did like teaching, but I didn't have any preparation for classroom management, this sort of thing. So I said, you know, I really want to go back and finish my PhD. So I went to Boston University, and I got into a research group, and I started doing research, and I always sort of had my teaching gig on the side, which was, by that I mean I had a teaching assistantship that was funding my way through my PhD program. So I was doing some some grading, as well as teaching some problem sessions, as well as being in the classroom and helping out with the professors who were teaching the large lecture courses. And one thing that I noticed was that some days I would go into the office and I would have a full day of research, and I would come home and I would be very exhausted. And other days I had a full day of teaching, and I would come home and I would just be happy and energetic. And so I just kind of learned that teaching was really for me. I still enjoy doing research, and I do research, but mostly in the summer, because my college really is a teaching university. It has a high teaching load. But I sort of just found out about myself that this is the type of thing that really gives me energy. I like interacting with the students. I like being around people. So that's kind of when I knew. I can also say that when Stephanie and I think we were in the same quantum mechanics class as undergrads. And I remember thinking, this guy has the best job in the world. And so I had it in my head, but it took a while for me to really figure that out. So I did go, from the time I was in the last few years of my PhD program, my advisor knew that I wanted to go into teaching. I did a research postdoc, but still with the goal of ending up at a place like I am now, at a place where I do mostly teaching and some research.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dominguez. Dr. Nair, would you please share with us your story?
Yeah, so I didn't know I wanted to go in teaching until probably halfway through grad school. So I think as an undergraduate student, I was really interested in the theories I learned in my classes. I was one of those students who would hound my professors during office hours, like, what if this situation? What about that situation? And then they told me, you know what, you should go to grad school. And I said, okay. So I went to grad school. I loved research. And then I was quote unquote forced to TA on the side to kind of pay for being a grad student. And so as I kind of went on and TAing and did the research, I loved my research. I loved doing the research. But as I kind of went on, I frankly kind of got jaded by the institutions around research, and simultaneously kind of falling in love teaching students and kind of getting them excited the way I was excited as a student too. And so somewhere in that middle of grad school is kind of when I made that transition. It's like, this is more enjoyable than that. And so I switched into teaching. I remember I was very careful in when I told my PI about when I wanted to just fully commit to teaching and whatnot. I remember I specifically waited till after I advanced. But once I did that, they were like, okay, good luck with that. And I was kind of off to the races then. And so that's kind of how I kind of stumbled onto that path.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nair. And Dr. Fraser, could you please share with us your career journey?
Yeah, so I I didn't start out life as someone who was sort of on a teaching career path at all. I did once I did my first research project as an undergrad, it was research all the way, and my PhD was in the UK, but it was sponsored by a biotech company, and so I really always thought that I was biotech bound, right? I'm an immunologist. I love to study disease. I want to cure diseases. That's where I'm going to go. But I was torn because I also super loved California. I had done an exchange year as an undergrad and at UC San Diego, and I was like, well, clearly I will be postdocing in America and or California. So I did come out for a postdoc, and then I ended up in Andrea Tenner's lab over at UCI, and I found my niche. I found what I wanted to do, and I just stayed. I was a little over comfortable, so I was a postdoc for about 8 years, and I was still like research all the way. And I actually, in my last couple of years, went to one of these panels at UCI for postdocs on alternative, in those days, alternative careers. For people not necessarily going on to become professors at our one institutions. And someone from Cal State Long Beach was there, and she was telling us, about how it had this mixture between research and teaching, which meant you didn't have to get sort of 3 R01s to run your lab, but you could still have a really nice research program. And you spent 50% of your time teaching. And I was like, yeah, I could probably, put up with 50% of my life teaching. I had, as a student in the UK, we didn't do TAing. I had not done any kind of things like that. So actually, I was lucky enough that my PI let me substitute teach for her in a class just once a year. I do one lecture on complement for a class for the medical students at UCI, and I loved it. And I realized that I just, not only do I enjoy teaching, but also it helped me kind of understand my subject even more, because the questions that people ask are really good oftentimes, and you're like, yeah, why do we think that, or why do we say that? So then I wouldn't say I'm a traditional applicant for a teaching job, right? Because it was a bit of a, well, I really hope I like it, because otherwise, you're going to hate 50% of your life if you don't. And it turns out I love it. And it, in terms of a job, for me, it was the perfect mixture. So I do have a very active research program. We're just much slower than we would be in a lab that has lots of postdocs and technicians and stuff, but we get a lot of great research done with my undergrads and my master's students, and so I get to fulfill that side of my passion, but also teaching kind of the next generation of scientists, and that's also really wonderful. And training them in lab techniques is also considered teaching, right? So it's not just the formal lecturing.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. We have a question from a participant, Charlene Smith, and her question is, what would you say the pros and cons are for liberal arts versus public college or university? Do any of our panelists have a strong opinion on that and would like to share?
I've got lots of opinions on that.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking you would be the right person to answer this question.
Yeah. But maybe not pros and cons, maybe just there are differences, and different things will suit different people, right? Yeah. So what might be a con for someone could be a pro for someone else, but yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Dominguez.
Well, first of all, I would say that it's the dichotomy between public university and colleges versus liberal arts is not necessarily true, because I think that Dr. Bailey and I went to the College of William and Mary, which I would call a liberal arts college, which is public. So I think, you can ask, what's the difference between being a big place and being a small place? There are differences there. And then you can say, what about being in a public versus private institution? So I am at a small place, and I'm also at a private institution. Both of those things affect the job in different ways. There are, first of all, there's your personal opinions about how the institution is run, and probably some things that you may not have thought about before you're an employee of these places. So something that I did not think too much about, but the way tuition is done at a private institution is just distasteful to me, frankly. I don't like the way there's a sticker price, and then there's sort of a discount price, and it's a negotiation. It's very business-like to me. So I just figured out pretty early on that I did not want to be a part of that process, which some of the faculty members are a part of, because we have committee work. So we haven't talked yet about service work, but one option for our service work is to be on a committee that evaluates basically how much money or how much of a discount in tuition the students are going to have. I didn't like being a part of that, so I just choose not to be a part of it anymore. But there are definitely different ways that private versus public institutions are run, and private institutions are run more like a business. So we are told pretty regularly at our faculty meetings about the finances and about how many students we need to get to be able to cover our budget for the next year. we're very much a part of that. We're very much brought into that, which frankly, I would rather not be a part of. I would rather just stick to the teaching. But then again, I also know that at public colleges and universities, there are also really big uncertainties about how funding is going to go, how much funding, what's happening in politics that's going to affect the amount of money that the institutions get. Public institutions are looked at more closely in some respect because they're paid for with public funds. So I guess I shouldn't get too far into that, but those are some issues that public versus private can get into. And then of course I've already talked, I won't talk much more about it, but there's a big difference in huge universities versus very small places, which affects how you teach. It affects your time distribution, how you spend your time, and other things like that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Dominguez. And I'm noticing we have 2 questions from Megan. Megan, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to wait and ask our panelists to discuss that when we delve into their research responsibilities. So moving on, I recall my very first day of teaching and walking into a lecture hall with over 300 students. And I could feel my heart in my throat. I remember breaking out in a sweat. My heart was pounding and my hands were very, very clammy. Panelists, did you always have confidence in your teaching abilities, or was this something that you developed over time? How did you know that you would be a great teacher? So let's start with Dr. Neer, please.
I have a really funny story. So small digression. So when I started teaching as a TA, in hindsight, I kind of realized I was extremely nervous. But for some reason, I psyched myself out saying, I'm doing fine. I got this under control. And then I was teaching physiology lab. And so I was showing students how to use this device called a pulse oximeter that measures it can measure your heart rate. And so like, okay, students, you just kind of put on your finger and you can read your heart rate. And I looked at it and I said like 140 beats per minute. And I was like, oh, that must be wrong. And I quickly took it off. And that's when I kind of started realizing like, I'm nervous about this. Even though I kind of thought otherwise, I needed a machine to tell me I was nervous about when I started teaching. So of course I was very, very, very nervous teaching. But in hindsight, it seems a little silly, but I did get, student feedback. Students like, oh, I enjoyed this, I enjoyed that. And it is anecdotal, but in the beginning, that's what kind of encouraged me. And I think that's important because that kind of I kind of asked myself, okay, I did that right. What else can I do better? What else can I improve on? And that was kind of a starting place. That's kind of when I kind of started thinking about taking my teaching seriously, is weirdly when I got a compliment from a student rather than a complaint. So that's kind of where I started. Yes, I was very, very nervous when I started.
Great, thank you, Dr. Neer. Dr. Frazier or Dr. Dominguez, would you like to add something here?
Sure. I mean, having never really run a class myself, Long Beach were kind to me and let me co-teach a class when I first started, but they put me in genetics, which is hilarious to me because I was literally 1 chapter ahead of the students at any moment in time. But the other teacher would come to all my lectures and then she would go over all the things I got wrong and all the, mistakes I made. And I'm a great believer in sort of faking it till you make it, right? So I was like, I'll just project confidence. I had to buy like proper shoes because I only lived in like tennis shoes my whole life. But it made me feel, like I was really a professor. But my favorite evaluation from my first semester was, her lectures do not always go smoothly, but she brings a lot of enthusiasm. So I think, and it got better from there. It was a steep learning curve that first semester. They've never let me teach genetics again. So they've moved me straight into molecular biology, which I'm much happier in that. but yeah, I think doesn't hurt to have a British accent. My evaluations always like my British accent, so I'm like, excellent. Doesn't matter what the content is then, as long as you say it with a British accent. No, you can learn, you can develop teaching skills for sure, and if you're in the right institution, they will help you develop those skills.
Thank you. Dr. Dominguez, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'll add a funny story that is not about a British accent, because obviously I don't have one, but I've always been pretty good at projecting. And I had an 8 a.m. class one time, 8 a.m. recitation section, and I had 4 classes sort of right after the other one, but only in the 8 a.m. section did I get the comments multiple times, "She's very loud." I think that had to do with the early hour. So there are 2 things that I think helped me become more confident over the course of my life, really, because as a high school student, I did not a ton, but I was involved in high school theater. So I did a little bit of acting, and I did a lot of debate and forensics. So I really liked the performance aspect. I still am nervous. I still get nervous every first day of class, but I definitely have an enjoyment being up in front of people. I think that that's fun. So I do also try to project a lot of enthusiasm in the class, because I am genuinely having fun. Another thing that kind of makes me more comfortable about being around students was just before I taught my own class, I had a lot of experience just finding little opportunities to do some teaching. So when I was at the University of Washington, I started out as a teaching assistant, and we did tutorials with students. So it wasn't a lecture position. It was sitting down with the students and working with them, and working on Socratic dialogue and that sort of thing. And it really helped to get into the mind of the students, I think. And then, I taught 9th grade, so that was a whole new experience. Then I was at Boston University. I did some more, I did some substitute lecturing, which was really helpful. I ran some of my own recitation sections, and I also had an opportunity to be, and it was called an NSFG K-12 fellow, which put me into some urban high school environments, and I worked with the physics teacher there. So I had sort of a lot of different experiences, and that gave me more confidence for how to handle different situations when I went into my own classroom. So that having those experiences definitely helps my comfort level. I also am kind of an over preparer. So I think a lot about, like, before the first day of class, I always think about, like, oh, how do I want this to go? And I sort of, by going through it in my head many times, sometimes many, many times, it helps me feel prepared and feel comfortable and feel more confident.
Thank you, Dr. Dominguez. Moving on to our next question. As you probably know, panelists, most students are under the impression that their professors have one duty, and that duty is to teach them. What are your other responsibilities, and about how much time do you spend on each? So for example, do you do research, service, administrative duties or responsibilities? And can you expand or tell us a little bit more about each of these in depth? Is there any panelist who would like to go first here?
Sure.
I'll either go first or last, because
okay.
I think I'm on one side of the spectrum here.
Go ahead, Dr. Nair. We'll start with you.
Okay, so I do zero research. That's why I said I'm on one spectrum. So I on campus, as part of my duties, I don't have a lab. I don't have to write papers. I get hit up to review papers all the time. That's not part of my kind of job per se. So yes, there's teaching, and being part of a public institution and being paid, it's actually very discreet about, like, you should be spending these many hours doing this and that. Like, your pay is put together about all that. So I can talk about that. So suppose about 50% of your time is spent teaching or prepping to teach. So in about 50-50 quantity. So if you teach 20 hours in the week, you at least allocated 20 hours of prep outside the classroom. And then on top of that, you have office hours. For my school, you have 5 hours of office hours a week, so you get paid for that. And then uh, to kind of make what is a 40-hour week, quote unquote, you have 5 hours of what we call shared governance. And so this is a big thing community colleges, especially in California, is that faculty members are expected to kind of participate in governing the college. And so they'll be part of committees and whatnot. And that's kind of part of shared governance, which I can talk about later, but that's part of it. Now, there's a whole bunch of unofficial things I have to do or else my job doesn't work. Then of course it's not on the contract. And so one thing is managing a bunch of our adjunct faculty. So I'm a full-time faculty member, so I'm kind of part on this tenure track and kind of part of the core group of biology faculty members. But we have a lot of part-time teachers that also help us teach the whole course load. And so a lot of times it's up to me to kind of manage other adjunct faculty to make sure there's unison in how all classes are taught and whatnot. Do a bunch of other things that come up, like sometimes there's quadrennial reviews, 4-year reviews and whatnot. So there's a whole bunch of just kind of management that they don't put on paper that you just kind of have to do because you're kind of like a senior member on the department or the campus.
Thank you, Dr. Nair.
Mhm.
Dr. Fraser, I'll have you go next. And if you wouldn't mind, perhaps you could hit on some of Megan's questions.
Yeah.
She's asking, how does research funding differ from R1 institutions? And is research driven largely by undergraduates? And do you have a more hands-on role in the lab conducting research?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So at the Cal State system, we are expected to teach, like I say, 12 units a semester, or we are expected to provide 12 units of some kind of activity for the university. So, but to get tenure, we are expected to have a thriving research program. But the rules for getting tenure at somewhere like Cal State Long Beach are different from somewhere like UC Irvine. We do not have to have a big multi-million-dollar R01 grant. We just need to have applied for external funding just to meet the baseline requirements for tenure. And if you get funding, then you move into the excellent category rather than just the competent category. But you also need to have published 3 to 5 papers with Cal State Long Beach student authors on them, which sounds fairly simple in 5 years, but it turns out, especially in different fields, it differs, right? There are some computational biologists that can get 5 papers in a month, really great papers, but, in fields like immunology, where you've maybe got a multi-mouse model or something, it can take years, and especially because, yes, our undergraduates are really our main drivers of research in the lab. I have 12 undergrads and usually 1 to 2 master's students in my lab. And so there's a lot of turnover with that as well. So I am in the lab. In fact, I was in the lab all day yesterday, hands-on, showing students how to split cells and how to treat cells and how to analyze data. So I don't do a lot of the generating the data myself, but a lot of the training is me, just because you have a turnover of people that leave before the next ones are trained up. So so there are grants. So we do have to get a grant. It is important to get a grant if you want to get tenure, because you need to be able to do research. If you work in an expensive field, right? My reagents, my antibodies, my cells, my media are expensive. There's people in my department, because it's a biology department, who count oysters on the shore, and so they don't need a huge amount of money, maybe some gas to put in the truck to take the students down to the beach or whatever. So all equally valid research, but some is more expensive than others, so it depends what you work on. But there are research grants from and I know NIH better than NSF, but that we are eligible for, that bigger institutions are not. So it's quite hard for me to get an R01, because grant reviewers say, oh, I don't know if you can, you can do what you say you can do at a Cal State. We can, but grant reviewers may not believe that. But we're a Hispanic serving institution, so there are grants like the R15 mechanism, the SCORE grants that specifically encourage or are specifically designed to fund faculty at smaller institutions. So they're smaller grants. I've been very successful getting the SCORE grants, which are sort of $300,000 4-year grants. That's for the total 4 years, so $75,000 a year. But that's all I need to run a smaller program. But then it just means the rate of research is slower.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Fleischer. Dr. Dominguez, would you mind answering Preeta's question, please? And her question is, do teaching professors also have to go through a tenure track system similar to what research profs at R1 universities have to go through? And I'm picking on you specifically because I know that you're primarily a teaching professor and you do have tenure at this point.
Yes, so I did go through a tenure process, and I'm now tenured. It is a tenure process analogous to the tenure process that you would go through in an R1 university, but it's also very different. R1 universities typically have some specific requirements. So Deborah mentioned 3 to 5 papers with undergraduates or something like that. At my university, at my institution, college, we don't have specific requirements like that. And that's kind of one of the problems, is that there's sort of vagueness to it. We complain about that a lot, that the expectations aren't as clear as they should be. But you are kind of expected. You're definitely, so number one at our institution is excellence in teaching. That's the highest requirement. It's the most important of the 3 pieces. Excellence in teaching, excellence in professional work. It's something vague like that. It's not actually called research because there's a variety of things that you can do. Some people don't do research per se, but do a lot of professional work. And third is service. So the typical thing is that you have excellence in teaching, and you can demonstrate that, and that you can demonstrate excellence in research as well. So you need to have some papers, but there's no requirement on what the paper, what exactly the quality of that paper is. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters, but there's no requirement for what type of impact level it has or anything like that some R1 institutions will have. You just have to, basically, you have to make the case for it. And it's complicated by the fact that those reviewing our tenure profiles, our tenure portfolios, are not from our discipline. So it is incumbent upon yourself as an individual to make the case that you are, in fact, excellent and competent in your field. They do ask for outside letters, so you can get people from your field to sort of vouch for you and say, yeah, she does good research, she's published in these journals, and she's active in the field and that sort of thing. So so yes, you do have to show, there are some standards that differs at every single institution, but there's definitely a big qualitative difference between the R1 institution, which is has pretty rigid requirements, and my institution, which is definitely more focused on teaching than research, and the other requirements are a little bit looser. I'll mention something about funding as well. Deborah talked a lot about funding. One reason that a teaching institution is attractive to certain candidates is that there is not a strict requirement for getting funding. So we have a new engineering professor who's a senior level, and he came from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, which is a much bigger university, and the direction of that university is going towards requiring the professors to bring in more money, to bring in more funding. And so this particular professor who moved over to our institution from there was just kind of, he had been around for a while, and he thought he did get plenty of grants, but he didn't like the pressure of having to get those grants. And he liked to have a little bit more flexibility. So we were hiring, and he came to our college, and now he still gets grants. And certainly if you're at our college and you get grants, that's looked upon favorably, but it is not required. And I'd say that there's a lot more value put on a diversity of accomplishments. So there are, of course, you can get research grants. I've been a part of a teaching grant, which is a NOIS grant through NSF, which is gives scholarships to aspiring high school science teachers. So there's funding coming in that way, but it's not necessarily a research grant. And I've also been a part of another NSF grant that is supporting high school Latino women who want to go into the STEM field as well. So we have those sorts of educational grants that we get and we bring in. And I'd say that those grants are looked at just as favorably as the research grants as well. We still do have some, I guess another thing is that the state of funding in the NSF, and I don't know as much about NIH, but NSF grants are getting more difficult to get. The percentage of acceptances is going down. So it's more competitive, and some people don't want to be to have that much pressure to have to get a grant when it's harder and harder to get a grant and your tenure depends on that. So that's, you could call that a benefit.
Thank you, Dr. Dominguez. I'm noticing
Please.
we're running a little short on time, so let's try to cover maybe one or two more questions. Are there any challenges or hurdles associated with this profession to consider prior to embarking on a career in this field? For example, biases, discrimination, diversity, climate, pay or salary, politics, job security, entitlement, or consumerism? And if so, how do you overcome those? Let's see. Do any of our panelists have a preference to go first? It's a tough question, isn't it?
That's a lot of things you mentioned there. We can.
Yeah, you could just pick one that you maybe feel strongly about.
I'll talk a little bit.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about being a woman in physics. In physics is a field that differs maybe from the biological sciences in that we've got a pretty low percentage of women, an even lower percentage of women of color, also a low percentage of humans of color. So there's lots of barriers sort of all around. I can say that for me, I've been pretty lucky that I haven't had a lot of explicit problems with hostile people, but certainly that exists, and I believe that it exists more. I don't know. I believe that it exists more in the environment because there are so few women. So there are definitely culture problems that we could have a whole panel discussion on. For me personally, what I have dealt with the most is starting a family in this field where it's kind of expected that you do what your advisor tells you to do. So as a PhD student, I was sort of giving messages to my advisor like, hey, I'd like to go into teaching and I'd like to go with my husband after we graduate. We'd like to be together. And he was sort of like, no, what you do is you go take a postdoc somewhere and he takes a postdoc somewhere else, and then, you know, you're away from each other for a few years. You get back together later, it's fine. And so these sort of like gentle nudges didn't really go anywhere until I went to him one day and said, so I am pregnant and I would like to stay with my husband. And he said, okay, in that case, I think you should be with your husband. So I negotiated having 2 children right at the end of my PhD and right at the beginning of my career. As a matter of fact, I found out I was pregnant with my second child a couple of days before I got my job offer for the current job that I have. So that was interesting. So I've dealt with, I'll just leave it at that. If you'd like to hear more about that, then maybe we can talk about it in discussions, but there's definitely some issues there.
Thank you. And Dr. Nair, very briefly, what would you like to add?
So I'll talk about kind of job security and salary, at least to kind of take a stab at getting a full-time position as a faculty member at a community college. You probably will have to basically become an adjunct professor, perhaps for, in fact, several years. And the job security that comes being an adjunct is not great. Salary is also not great. It is to become an adjunct faculty, basically become a part-time faculty member full-time, is a tough career. And I had to do that for a handful of years before I got my kind of stable position. It's a rough road. I don't really have a bunch of solutions. I have small solutions here and there, but no overall grand solution to what is really a systemic issue. And of course, I'm willing to talk about that more in the breakout sessions too.
Great, thank you. Let's see, let me check in with Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, do we have time for one more question?
I said, I promise I was not sleeping behind. I was listening, and it was a wonderful conversation.
Of course.
I was just in the stealth mode, but wonderful discussion. Yes, we do have around like 10 minutes. If you want to take a couple of questions from the audience, or maybe just have a discussion on certain things which we might have missed.
Sure. So let's open it up then to the audience or our attendees. Are there any additional questions that we could answer at this point for you?
Perhaps while people are typing in, I can mention that we've all got full-time, sounds like tenure track positions, but there are many opportunities, at least at Long Beach, and I'm assuming in other colleges as well, to get your feet wet with teaching. We hire a lot of lecturers in specialty fields to teach classes that we simply don't have the faculty to teach anymore. And that's going to be true even in a grand recession, right? We still need to cover our classes. So actually at one of these events a couple of years ago, I put one of the people in touch, and he's now a full-time lecturer at Long Beach, but because we needed someone with his background. So there's lots of jobs in teaching, but getting the tenure track or the full-time ones, you know, are the sort of the slight, you know, more difficult ones to get, but there is an opportunity to practice teaching, you know, even as a postdoc or a grad student, if your PI allows.
Right, and thank you, Dr. Frazier. That's an excellent point, and actually related to one of my questions here. So as Dr. Singh mentioned, prior to becoming a professor, I was a full-time lecturer for 4 years at UC Santa Cruz. What resources are available for individuals that are interested in gaining teaching experience? So for example, teaching assistantships, teaching programs, volunteering, community college teaching, and adjunct roles. Which of these do you recommend and why? And are there other avenues that these individuals should consider? Dr. Nair, do you have any comments on that?
So yeah, the first thing you can do is get a master's. So if you got a master's before coming into your PhD program, then at least the community colleges, you have the qualification to teach under that master's. You have a master's in biology, you can technically teach any biology course. And It makes it much easier for a department to hire you as an adjunct if you have a master's. If you're about, I know this at UCI, if you're about to advance, you can take your advancement and make it also count as a master's thesis. You can get a master's via basically getting your committee to agree that you're master worthy. And then while advancing, you can simultaneously get a master's too. That's what I did. And it works out for the department because it looks like they graduated a master's student on top of it. So if you are about to advance or you're going to, by all means, it's just like another piece of paper, go ahead and do that. Get the signatures and do that, because teaching with a master's is a lot easier. If you've already advanced, I know at the community college level, it's possible to teach after with just advancing. It takes a little bit more paperwork, but you should definitely try to do it. And then other than teaching, for if you're interested in the community college route, there is a program hosted by Graduate Division called CCCIP. Maybe the P stands for program, so saying program again is redundant, but it's basically the California Community College Internship Program. It's hosted by UCI's Graduate Division in partnership with neighboring community colleges, Santa Ana College, Orange Coast College, and one more that I don't remember. And so what this does is it gives you a mentor who is at least close to the discipline you're in, and you have now a community college contact, a mentor of sorts that tells you the ins and outs, basically everything that can happen inside and outside the classroom. And for me, it led to job opportunities in the future. I interned at Santa Ana College. I made inroads, and surprise, surprise, I now teach at Santa Ana College. And that won't always happen, but despite that not happening, that contact was invaluable in my understanding of the career and just broadened my horizons.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. Dr. Dominguez, I know we touched on some of your background and in particular teaching high school. I'd like to give Dr. Frazier a chance to just share her thoughts about resources available.
So actually, Dr. Singh might know better, but there's a couple of programs between UCI and Cal State Long Beach that help to promote teaching experience. So I'm working with someone even as we speak that she will be teaching one of my classes in the coming weeks. And that's I think she's in the prep program. And then, but you have another program as well, right? That connects postdocs with mentoring at Cal State Long Beach. But it's a mentored program anyway, so they put you in touch with someone that's in the same field as you, and then you discuss teaching methods. They teach one of your classes, you give them feedback, and I've given several people sort of feedback on application materials and stuff, and like I said, then we actually managed to kind of connect one person with an actual job at Long Beach. So I mean, that's not, I can't guarantee that, but and a lot of going back to your other question about challenges is, Long Beach is a Hispanic serving institution, a minority serving institution. We heavily encourage minorities in science to apply to our programs. Our students need to see people teaching them that look like them, that have backgrounds like them, and we know that they respond really well to that, and we work very hard at making sure that when we recruit as diverse a population as we can, and that we also don't just sort of leave them out there to you're our diversity, you have to be on all our diversity panels and do that, that we support those faculty members as well to the best of our ability and make sure that they can thrive. And women in biology is a 50-50 anyway, so women are okay, but we do more than 50% of the administrative work, in my opinion, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, so just to
Can I
mention,
add-
sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
I just wanted to mention that a great resource for resources is for you to find professional organizations within your discipline. So in physics, it would be the American Association of Physics Teachers. and they have lots of resources for finding resources and also keeping abreast of the developments in your field.
Great. I just want to add one more thing about the UCI thing. UCI has a program called Division of Teaching Excellence and Innovation. They do have a whole pedagogical fellows program, which students and postdocs can enroll into, and they do offer it, I believe, throughout the year. So I just added a link in the chat, dei.uci.edu. You can look up that program. And also our program, GPS STEM, when we were GPS Biomed, we used to offer something training program in teaching, which was called TAPSTEM, Teaching Apprenticeship in STEM, which now got taken over by DTEI. And they're still offering the course in some form where you can actually really work with an instructor and build a curriculum and teach the whole course. And it's a little bit more intensive, but then maybe you can do a little bit priming with events like this and networking, and then learn from other resources that Rachel mentioned about societies, and then take a deeper dive if you think that's really for you.
Thank you. And so in just the few minutes remaining, I thought, because we're almost out of time, maybe in 30 seconds, what is the main message that you would like the audience to take away? Or in other words, what's the final piece of advice you'd like to give the audience? Let's start with Dr. Fraser, please.
I would say a teaching career is not for everyone, but if you love teaching, it's the best career in the world.
And Dr. Nair, how about you?
If you're interested in teaching, go do it, but always make sure you're improving your teaching. Never stop getting better, and your career will follow. Wonderful.
And finally, Dr. Dominguez.
Well, I would echo the same sentiments as a fellow panelist. Get in there, get to teaching, and try to figure out if it's the thing that that energizes you and is something that you really feel passionate about. And if you feel passionate about, then go after it.
Great. Thank you very much to all three of our panelists. And over to you, Dr. Singh.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie. This was a wonderful panel discussion. We thoroughly enjoyed the process. And I really appreciate our other panelists to take time out and have this wonderful, offer such a great insight and talk about your career journey.